Howdy gang, Travel It's Tim here today. Man, it's so hot out here. I gotta find somewhere for some shelter really fast. I'm about to fall out. Whew. Oh man, holy crap. I had to get out of that sun. I was near woods, but everything was so thick I couldn't get back into anything. I finally found a little spot to get back into. Today we're talking about the ultimate survival rule of threes. You're not going to want to miss this. Hang out. Alright, so what we're talking about today is a survival rule of threes. There's a lot of videos and a lot of things about this subject and stuff, but I'm going to show you my take on it in order from most important to least important. Ultimate survival rule of threes. Rule number one, most important. A human being is known that they can live for 3 minutes without oxygen. Think about that. Alright, you start thinking to yourself, well, when am I going to find myself without oxygen for 3 minutes? Let me give you a couple of examples. First of all, if you're hiking, especially down near water or something like that, and you fall in, and maybe you're not a good swimmer, or get sucked up underneath there and stuff, 3 minutes, that's a lot of grace. Because what happens when you can't breathe, you start fighting against it, and your heartbeat raises. Now the 3 minutes went down to about a minute. Second of all, how about if you live in the extreme north where it's ice cold? Speaking of ice, we're walking across the lake, all of a sudden, you're down through the ice. Hypothermia is going to set in. That's another thing we'll talk about. But most people that fall through ice and into water, 90% of the time they can't find their way back up through the hole they fell into. Thus, within 3 minutes or less, they're dead. Another example of lack of oxygen. Say you find yourself, whether it be running from something or trying to hide, and you end up in a confined space and there's no oxygen coming in and out. Well, first thing you're going to want to do is try to relax and take deep, slow breaths until you can locate where there is an air chamber or some sort of oxygen that you can reach to survive. Because if not, you're going to be breathing in that carbon dioxide that your own breath is creating, and you're not going to survive very long. Second, ultimate survival rule of three, shelter. The average human being can go 3 hours without shelter. It may vary in different demographics, and I'll explain how. We're going to start by where I live, in the way deep south, where it is always hot down here. 3 hours to find a shelter, you're like, whatever. Listen, if you get stuck somewhere and you can't find shelter, you're going to end up getting heat stroke, and you're going to die. What happens also if you don't get shelter? And we get afternoon thunderstorms every single day. We're out hiking, we stayed out a little bit later than what we should have. Bang! The storms roll through, and I get caught in the thunderstorm and get soaking wet. And I have no shelter. Then it turns dark. Now, hypothermia is going to set in, and you ain't going to survive. Extreme cold weather, like up north or way far down by the polar caps or whatever. I don't know how you guys do it, and just like you guys probably don't know how I come out here in the heat every single day. But I'm sure in extreme cold especially, there are certain ways of having to find shelter, because number one killer without shelter, anywhere you go, is hypothermia. Number two is shelter. 3 hours without shelter. Number three on the ultimate survival rule of three. Human being can live for 3 days, give or take, without water. Problem is, most people after a day without water, they ain't gonna be doing very well, let alone 3 days. That is a very high limit. There have been people known to live for a few days after that. I would not try that, but that is number three on the list of ultimate survival rules of three, is 3 days without water. And now number four for the ultimate survival rule of threes, 3 weeks without food. Wow, that's a long time without a cheeseburger or lunch or something like that. But believe it or not, it all depends on what condition your body's in. If you're way overweight and stuff like that, or you have a health condition, or you don't have a lot of weight at all on your body, depending on fat content and muscle build on your body, it could vary either way about it. Anyway about it, if you've got to go 3 weeks without eating anything, you're not going to be feeling very well at all. All right, let's take a quick moment and run down through those 4 ultimate survival rules of 3. Number 1, 3 minutes without air. Number 2, 3 hours without shelter. Number 3, 3 days without water. Number 4, 3 weeks without food. All right, let's take just a moment and conclude this ultimate survival 4 rules 3. The number 1 thing on that list that I mentioned to you was being able to breathe for 3 minutes. That's it. Now, it's going to vary depending on what shape your body's in. The best way to avoid this is don't find yourself in a situation where you can't breathe. Now, the second one that came on the list was shelter. Like I said, it's going to vary in your demographic. No matter where you live, there's always going to be extreme conditions of one way or another. That's why I always, when I'm out and I know I'm going to be somewhere and I might be compromised, I bring some sort of a tarp and some way of putting a tarp up. That's going to be my shelter. That's number 2. And that could be the difference between hypothermia, life, and death. And even if you find yourself in a situation where you can't make a shelter, simply by getting out of the hot heat and into shade, that's 20 degrees difference. This way your body can actually control the temperature without overheating. Next thing you know, you have heat exhaustion or a stroke. 3 days without water. Well, what happens when you're out and about and you have a hard time finding water? That's a whole nother video. I would suggest in a cold climate where there's snow and ice, one of the biggest things that I would always make sure to bring with me is a way to start a fire and melt snow and ice. Even if you have to boil that water because maybe the snow and stuff is contaminated, at least you're going to have some sort of distilled water and you're going to survive a little bit longer. Or if you live in the extreme heat where you're constantly needing to replenish your body with some sort of a water or a fluid and stuff. Lots of ways. Sanitizing tablets, Sawyer Minis, the Life Straw, solar still, like we've seen in another video. There are ways of collecting water. How about if you put a shirt over a branch on a tree and let it collect dew from overnight and stuff? There's ways of finding water in the middle of nowhere and surviving until you find help. 3 weeks without food. Oh my goodness. All right, why do you think I've been putting so many videos out on how to throw a knife, slingshot, spears, traps, and stuff like that? These are ways ultimately when you're in a wild, no matter where you're at, you can find ways of capturing or snaring or trapping small game. In the meantime, I always bring something very simple. Dehydrated little meals, little things of spams and stuff like that, that will at least give you a little bit of carbs and stuff to get you through. This is why it's so important to make sure how and where and what you're going to do when you find yourself in a situation where survival is the only thing you got. Why do you think I come out in the woods like a little mirror, stuff like that, so I can signal for help? Or a simple little paracord bracelet, a 5-in-1. Got a little compass on there. Also, I have a whistle to blow for help, and there's a knife in here, a little knife blade. See that? And the other end of this, I don't know if I can get this out or not, we'll see how smart we are, is a tiny little ferro rod. I have my little knife, my striker. Another way to survive when you have only little to survive with. There's going to be a lot of you guys out there that are going to say, none of this is relevant these days. This is year 2020. Technology and all that other stuff. You, my friend, that think that way,
have the most to worry about.
In these unprecedented times that we live in, these little tips and tricks, survival, might not seem like a whole lot. What happens? The day came, you had to find your way out and surviving in the woods. Could you make it?
Well, could you?
That's all the time we got for this one. Thanks so much for hanging out and watching the video and letting me show you the 4 ultimate survival rules of 3. Very important stuff and knowledge to know. These days and our way of life may feel irrelevant to be learning these types of skills, but you never know. This day and age, anything could happen. And by knowing these skills at least you have a heads up and a leg up on everybody else, because 99.9% of society that had to deal with any of this stuff, you're not going to survive. Thanks so much for hanging out. Till next time, I'll see you on the next adventure. Take care.